Hey, what's up guys? So I just got the Uniden R9w installed in our Kia EV9. And I had the system professionally installed. Everything from the controller to the display, and then of course the front and rear radar and laser. And as usual, I had the system installed over at Systems Unlimited in Bellevue, Washington. There's not a lot of places that I would actually trust to do a good job on my own car or that I would feel comfortable recommending, but I've used them many times now and I've been really impressed by their work. And if you're also in the Pacific Northwest, I would highly recommend giving them a call. Now, in this video, I want to take a look at what all is involved with getting a system like this professionally installed in my car. Now, before we get to the install, I actually had two main questions. Number one, which system should I go for in the first place? And number two, where should everything be installed in the car? Now, when it comes to choosing different systems, I've got pretty much all the top systems installed in my Audi, and I've kind of narrowed it down to the Kia as far as for radar, maybe something like the Escort Redline CI360C or the Uniden R9w. For laser, it was kind of between the ALP and the Uniden as well. Now with the Escort system, even though their radar detector is quieter out of the box, and their smaller laser jammer heads are much more aesthetically appealing and easier to hide and place in a car, I haven't been a huge fan of what I've been seeing from Escort from the performance side and how they're handling updates to address these issues. With Uniden, the radar detector performance is really nice. It's a little bit chatty out of the box, but I've definitely been able to quiet it down using the different settings and apps. On the laser side, the performance is really good. The heads are bigger and uglier, but I can fit them in my car, and then I've actually got them covered up. And we'll actually take a look here at a couple different ways of how we accomplish that here in this car. And I also like the fact that I can independently control the operation of the different heads in software. So afterwards, once I get to testing, I can actually change some of the behavior to optimize things, something that I can't do with like the Escort and ALP jammers, which have everything locked down on the hardware side. And so for these reasons, I ultimately wound up choosing the Uniden R9w. I actually had an R9 originally, and then we swapped out the CPU for the R9w once that was made available. Now moving on to the install, the first thing of course was to get the R9w set up on the bench with everything plugged in and turned on and verifying that all the different components are working properly. Plus, I really like the fact that the R9w has Wi-Fi built in, which made it so much easier to get this system updated and ready to go. Then starting off here first with the CPU, we actually installed that under the dash, and it was installed in a way that makes the USB port accessible for any updates over USB if I don't want to do them over Wi-Fi. Additionally, with the Uniden CPUs, the power cable is soldered directly to the CPU, and so for that reason, they added some quick releases to make it much easier to disconnect and maybe change systems down the line, whether it's for repairs, service, future upgrades, etc. Then for the radar detectors, starting off here first with the front radar detector antenna, that was installed in the front bumper area, and they use the factory Uniden brackets, which they actually really like. They're nice and adjustable, and then they built a custom bracket that allowed them to clamp it onto the existing metal bumper. And then once that was locked down, they can aim the radar detector antenna to make sure it's installed straight and level. Then for the rear radar detector antenna, this was pretty similar. It was installed in the rear bumper area, and luckily the EV9's bumpers are made of plastic. There's nothing metal installed in front of them, and so for that reason we can install them to have them be basically invisible without the plastic bumpers meaningfully impacting the performance in any way. Then moving on to the laser jammer side, this one definitely took more work here. You see, one of the big questions here was, well, where do we install the laser jammers on the front and rear in the first place? We were thinking maybe some of the black plastic on the front, for example, would be a good place to install them, but we ultimately wouldn't know until we had a chance to pull the bumper off and see what was actually behind the bumper itself. And we ultimately wound up installing the laser jammer heads in the lower black area. There was quite a bit of plastic back behind there that they had to drill away. And then they also had to drill holes into the black plastic itself to make room for the laser jammer head. And of course, instead of following the curvature of the car, they wanted to make sure that the head was pointed straight and level to make sure that it could perform properly too. Then inside the bumper, they built some custom brackets to actually hold the heads nice and straight. And these mounts were also nice to use instead of glue so that in case we needed to move or replace things down the line, it was much easier to adjust for future service. And then on the front, for aesthetic purposes, they custom built some head covers out of smoked acrylic. They would design these first in CAD, and then they would laser cut out some mock-ups to make sure that everything fit properly on the car. And then once everything looked good, they would 3D print all the different parts. They would then spray paint them black to make sure they looked good, and then they attached everything to the front of the car. And with that smoked acrylic, it allows the laser to actually receive the laser signals from the police laser gun and then also fire back to jam without otherwise being visible to the naked eye, which is very nice. This way, the whole thing stays much more stealthy and hidden on the car. Then for the rear laser jammer, the question was, should we put them in the rear license plate area? Should we put them down in like the rear reflectors? Where should they go? And ultimately we wound up putting the outer two heads down in the rear reflector area, and then the center head right next to the backup cam area. Then for the center head, they again built a custom housing to keep things more hidden and stealthy. This too was custom designed in CAD and then 3D printed. Then after spray painting it black, they would install that on the car as well, and it would help to keep the laser jammer head much more hidden and less visually obvious. And because Unidin's laser jammer heads are already pretty big as it is, I actually really appreciated them keeping that housing as small as otherwise possible. Now the outer heads, this was actually pretty cool. From the factory, the EV9 has two reflectors down there, and a common thing that I've seen them do on a lot of other cars is they'll remove the factory reflectors and replace those with smoked acrylic with the heads installed behind them. And to accomplish it here on the EV9, they would remove the rear bumper and then remove the reflectors themselves as well. They would then create the smoked acrylic to fill in that gap, as well as fabricate the custom mounts to hold the heads in place as well. And honestly, I love the end result here with how good it looks and how hidden this install is. Now the extension cables for the laser jammer heads were actually a little bit short in practice. The EV9, it's a pretty long 3-row SUV, and so they weren't actually able to stretch the jammers all the way up to the laser distribution box up at the front. And so for that reason, they actually had to custom extend the cables themselves. With the Uniden cables, they actually use twist lock connectors instead of like RJ connectors like the ALP does. So it's more work for the installers to extend the cables as needed, as opposed to like crimping on a new connector, which is what they do for the Redenso and the ALP systems. So on the install side, that was not as good. I actually have a whole write-up that I shared on the forums with a lot of the installers' feedback with what they liked and what they didn't like about the Uniden system, and I'll link to that full discussion thread down in the description below if you're an installer and you'd like to read up a little bit more about that. Anyways, all the different laser jammers would actually plug into the laser distribution box, which was also installed on a custom mount in the front bumper area. And for easier access and future service, that laser distribution box was actually installed in front of the driver's side wheel. Additionally, because there's so many different cables in there, they also labeled each individual connector with labeled heat shrink. And in case maybe a future technician accidentally cuts off the heat shrink by mistake or something, they also wrote in Sharpie the numbers for each of the additional heads to make it so they could reconnect the different heads properly. Then for the heat shrink itself, they found this was extra important on the Unidens because unlike something like the ALP, the twist lock connectors do not actually lock in place. And so over time with vibration in the cars, it's possible potentially maybe some of the heads will start to loosen and disconnect. And so for that reason, after they twisted the different connectors closed, they also put heat shrink in place to really keep everything nice and tight and working properly for years to come. Next, let's take a look at the R9w's display. And I chose to have it installed on top of the steering column, and they built a custom housing around the display. They gave me a couple different options of what I wanted to have it say on the display, and I opted to have it say Kia so it would blend in with the car a little bit more. And then they built the whole thing out in CAD. Now, one of the interesting things was how do they actually get it to fit the curvature of the top of the steering column? Well, it turns out they've got a special tool to help measure this. And they would basically take this tool and slide it down on top of the steering column, and it would measure out the exact shape and curvature of the steering column. It reminded me a lot of those toys you would play with sometimes as a kid that had a lot of those flat pins, and you would stick your hand in, and it would help to save the shape of your hand. Remember that? This is actually pretty similar, but for measuring cars. And then once they had the shape, they could save that shape, and that would then give them the exact amount of curvature they needed for the base of the display. Additionally, if we ever need to remove that display, instead of having one continuous wire that goes all the way down to the CPU, they actually also added some quick release connectors to the display itself so that they could plug and unplug it underneath the steering wheel column. And they also did the same thing for the controller as well. Now for the controller, we put that on the dash, and to angle it towards the driver, they actually built a little bracket back behind the controller. And then to tuck in the cable itself, because the tolerances in the dash are so tight, it was actually too tight to stuff the cable in there. So what they did is they actually stripped away kind of the outer insulation around the cable and then exposed just the individual wires so that it could slip through there. And this way they could then reclose the dash and have it basically clamping down on the pins without maybe leaving a big gap or anything with the larger, thicker wire. And then for the alert LED, I wanted to have it installed on the dash so that the dash cam could actually see it lighting up. So for front or rear radar or laser alerts, you can actually see that visually there too. And to do this, they just drilled a little hole in the dash panel and then stuck the LED right up through it. And this gave us a really clean, small, and unobtrusive setup. Then the GPS antenna was also installed down under the dash. This was actually a bit of an issue because with the first-gen Uniden GPS antennas, they're not actually waterproof. And in my Audi, turns out I've started having GPS errors since I had the R9 installed. And a lot of the GPS antennas are installed in like the front bumper area. That's really common. And most of the GPS antennas, including ALP, Escort, and most everybody else, those antennas are waterproof. But we didn't realize the Uniden ones were not. And so for that reason, we actually installed the GPS antenna under the windshield, under the glass, like in the dash. Now, luckily, we've been discussing this kind of stuff with Uniden, and for their newer GPS antennas, they're actually going to be sealing them properly, so they are going to be weather sealed and waterproof, so you are going to be able to install those in like a front bumper type area. But I've got kind of the older ones. They work fine otherwise, they're just not weather sealed until we put them inside the car. We also had to do the same thing in my Audi. While I was there, we had to put in a new GPS antenna, kind of like in a similar spot in the dash, and then we also swapped out the R9 CPU for an R9w CPU. We also found that there's some issues when you do a CPU swap like that, where sometimes some of the firmware versions for the different components will have a mismatch, even if you try to update the firmware, which can cause a variety of different issues. Reported that to Uniden. They gave us a new firmware which addresses this issue, so I expect this kind of stuff to be fixed in future firmware update releases, but just kind of wonky stuff that we've seen with the upgrades. Anyways, once I got the R9w CPU installed in the Audi, I was able to set it up with Wi-Fi, and now I've got in-car Wi-Fi in that car, and the Wi-Fi functionality available on that R9w, which has actually been really helpful. On the Kia, I don't have Wi-Fi built in, but every time I start up the car at home or I'm done driving and I come back home, it connects to Wi-Fi and lets me know if there's an update or anything. It's a lot faster to connect than something like the Escort, for example. The notifications aren't as good, and I've talked about kind of some of this stuff in other videos, and I want to do another video coming up that goes over my like day-to-day impressions with the R9w because it's turned into one of my daily drivers. So I'll maybe cover more of that stuff in another video, but either way, coming back to the install, I'm actually really happy with how this install went. I think the results were beautiful, the quality of the work with all the little attention to detail that they did under the hood, with things that most people wouldn't notice that help make future repairs or service, if needed, much easier, with making sure there's no rattles and vibrations in the car, with custom printing different stuff to keep everything hidden in stealth. Like, again, I'm really impressed with the quality of the work, and I'm really happy with the install that we now have in the EV9. And so for that reason, I'm not really needing like the windshield mount detectors the way that we've been using before. And so, yeah, that's the look here as far as the install and what all was done here in the EV9. And if you'd like a similar install in your car and you're also in the Pacific Northwest, you can reach out to Systems Unlimited and they can help you out with getting it installed on your vehicle as well. And now that that is done, stay tuned for more videos going over the R9w. And I'd like to do a video going over my thoughts and impressions of actually using the system. And then I'd also like to do a more complete review comparing all the different, Escort, Stinger, Uniden, NetRadar, Redenso, like an updated look here of all the different custom installed radar detectors as well. So definitely more stuff to come. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I love getting to see all the behind the scenes stuff with like really good quality installers and seeing what they're capable of. And so it was fun to record this, and it's been fun to share this here with you. If you like this kind of stuff, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can get notified as more videos like this go live. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing great, and I'll see you in the next one.